This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Now, 2024 has been defined in many industries by widespread rounds of redundancies and layoffs all over the world. However, hiring and retaining talent remains as much of a concern as ever for the majority of SME CEOs, and particularly for those with high growth aspirations. And building a clear and consistent employer brand and EVP can be an amazing secret weapon for people and TA functions. But it can be hard to know where to start, what value it will add, and when it will deliver a clear ROI. In today's episode, we're joined by Saqi Sheikh, the Chief People Officer of EcoOnline. Saqi is a many-time people leader, and many-time people leader of rapidly scaling or private equity-backed businesses. So is no stranger to the process of building compelling brands quickly and under pressure. Saqi, welcome to the show. We're really looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Felix. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, just to give our listeners a sort of feel for who you are and sort of what angle you're coming at this conversation from, could you just give us a really high level of the sorts of businesses that you've led, people functions and the sort of changing of employer brand at?
Yeah. Of course. I think, it's safe to say probably for the last 20 years or so, the experience has been in some sort of a tech type of organization. And if you think about how technology has evolved over the last 20 years, I think you can also presume that, all those companies have been growing and growing quite fast. So whether it's sort of, mobile tech or data tech or fintech or whatever, that those sort of businesses and those sort of companies have been companies that have started off from a fairly small base and then have had some sort of investment put in there. And then there's been, of course, the pressure and the ambition and the objectives to grow, globalize, and really, grow what we're doing in the tech part of the business as well.
So the sort of brand and how you're attracting candidates is, I would imagine, then quite important.
Of course, especially if you've worked in a large organization. I suppose you think less of it because if you're working for, Mars, or if you're working for Google, or if you're working for a well-known brand, normally the public will know who you are when you're recruiting or when you've got something on social media or when you have a name that nobody's heard of. There's a lot of work to do to, first of all, understand what that means for internally the employees, but also how do we want to come across externally as well. So yeah, absolutely, it's the growth of the company, but also the growth of the employer brand at the same time as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And you mentioned those sort of bigger companies. One of the things that I found fascinating, I don't do very much work with those sort of businesses, but that sort of brand recognition can be such a fascinating double-edged sword. So I've done some work with some of the businesses in the Virgin Group and also Apple, years ago. And in both cases, some of the assumptions that candidates had about the business and the business culture, because of the iPhones and the fact that it's Silicon Valley tech, or in Virgin Group, the sort of broader Virgin brand and Richard Branson, all the amazing entrepreneurial things that he's done, they had incorrect assumptions about the working culture because of the consumer culture. And I wonder whether you've found for those less well-known brands on the consumer side, what the interplay is between employer brand and customer brand.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Virgin actually, because that's one of the brands that I came across in my early career. Not because I had worked there, but because I had this assumption of this great brand with lots of fun things, and then I thought about it. And I thought, why do I think that? What makes me think that? And when you drill down, it's because of the way that they advertise, it's how they come across in their written sort of tone, etc. And that made me, and again, early in my career, I was like, oh, I really want to work for an organization or a brand like Virgin, or a brand like back in the day when Facebook was expanding and when Google were really those are the brands that I wanted to work for. And why? Because I associated them with fun somehow, and with growth and with opportunity. When you haven't got that advantage, then it's about, in my experience, it's about starting inside and making those things true for your employees first. So if I think about the things that I've just said, fun, growth, opportunity, you can't go out when there's an unknown brand and start shouting about those things straight away, because I'm not sure how effective that would be. But when you start working on those elements of, the culture piece and the values piece that then leads to fun, growth, opportunity, then your employees naturally start telling other employees about it. And then this, now we have social media, and there's a lot that, people talk about on various social media types of places around, why I love working for this place, or why the growth that I've had, or how my career has developed. And for example, for me personally, I was working at YouGov. This was back in 2007, 2008. When they were not so well known as a brand. But I joined them and I stayed with them for about 8 years or so. And my career grew with them as that organization grew. And I was able to then talk about that with other people in my peer network groups, social media and so on. And YouGov is a well-known brand now, but it got my voice out there as an employee as well.
It's really interesting. And I think you're so right to be focusing on the reality of the organization first, because in a sort of social media world, but also a jobs market that's really categorized by high volume, by a sort of, I don't want to say post-truth, because I feel like that, I don't know, is that a little melodramatic? People have all-time low degrees of trust in organizations. So if you're putting something out there that's unauthentic, I think it really does get found out quickly. And I think that your audience, whether it's consumers or whether it's candidates, can be very unforgiving.
Absolutely.
Of that sort of thing. Whereas the sort of that social proof of having employees who are sort of confirming what you're putting out there, that's so powerful.
Yeah, and employees will be very genuine about how they feel, right? So I remember talking to candidates who'd come from some, really well-known brands, and you would assume that those brands have really good employee cultures and really good sort of, I suppose, opportunities and processes and so on, because of the size of the brand and so on. But I have had in the past experiences of candidates that have come from those brands and said, actually, it isn't all that. It isn't what you think it is. The reality is very different, and the reality is this, and it's shocking, And then you find years later that that starts to come out more because more people are talking about it, and really can have a massive impact on the performance of that organization, the performance of the brand, and therefore it's never a good idea to try and pretend something or say something on the outside that actually isn't very true on the inside, because employees will tell the world.
I think that's really interesting. So I'd love to understand your own journey with employer brand and realizing how important it can be, and what a great tool it is. Because we were literally just talking before we started recording on the fact that at EcoOnline you're going into this amazingly exciting growth phase, just starting to think about what that means for your brand and how you're positioning in various different audiences. But what was your first foray into, I always say that word, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Anyway, what was your first experience of employer brand as a really important tool in the toolbox of a people function?
I think, well, I guess my personal experience, I remember as a graduate going into an organization and sitting in reception and being really excited and feeling like, oh my God, I really want to be a part of this. And looking at people, why? Because I was looking around and I was looking at people that were walking through reception, people that were coming down and shaking hands with other people, the way that the receptionist was taking the call and, showing people where to go, people walking through and talking about the business. I was like, oh my God, there's a buzz here, there's an excitement here, there's something here, and I want to be a part of it. And I don't know what that was, but that for me was a feeling that I really wanted to keep with me wherever I went, because that feeling made me want to jump out of bed in the morning and go to work and do my best. And I have been at stages of my career where I have not had that feeling. And that's dull, because then you don't want to come into work and then you don't want to do your best. And then, what happens to your performance? What happens to, the ability of the impact that you're wanting to make? It doesn't happen. So that's my sort of, I guess, my first sort of feeling, apart from, being at university and learning about, engagement and stuff. That was my first sort of real feeling of, okay, this is what it means to feel some sort of sense of engagement, some sense of belonging, a sense of, I really want to be a part of this. I really want to do good things here, because that's naturally going to fire that intrinsic motivation to get stuff done. So I guess that's my earliest recollection of, what it felt for me to understand what employer brand was without having necessarily putting that theoretical spin on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I love that that's grounded in the fundamentals of the candidate experience, which I actually wasn't expecting you to say, but it's fantastic. And I think it's so often that there are sort of elements of what you were saying and that were very unexpected, but I think so important. So the fact that candidate experience plays such a big role in it, the fact that you were so junior and yet had this feeling of electricity in the air, which,
yeah.
And then I think the final bit there is maybe the hardest element, which is, as with a lot of things with brands, sometimes it's quite difficult to, you spoke of it almost like kind of like an alchemy or like a magic to it. And a feeling rather than anything like really, really tangible, which I suppose for someone looking to harness an employer brand is a challenging ask.
Well, that's it, right? That's where you feel like, I wish I had a magic wand where I could sprinkle a bit of this magic on everybody to get them to feel that electricity or that engagement or that excitement. And that's what we're trying to do now at EcoOnline, and it's something that, I've been involved in my last few roles, where we've started to think about, okay, if we could design our employer brand from scratch, what would that look like? And there's been different reasons in my different sort of roles for doing that. But where I am now, we are a result of 15 acquisitions that have come together. And each one of those acquisitions had their own story, their own brand, their own, this is how we used to do it type of thing. And we've come together now as a new leadership team of what we call One Eco, so one brand. And we've started to talk to our employees about, well, what does that mean? What is important for you to feel like you're a part of One Eco rather than that acquisition that you came from? What do you love about working here? What don't you like so much about working here? And through those types of conversations, we've started to build something that we call a culture code, which then supports values and turns into culture and so on. So I can talk a little bit more about that, but that's that sort of way of, I suppose, understanding what's the excitement for the individual, and does that excitement for that individual match others? And if so, then how can we capture it? What does it look like? How can we explain it? And how can we explain it internally first before we can shout about it externally? So yeah, it's how to create that feeling for everybody in the organization.
What an amazing challenge to try and bring together 15 different organizations into one culture. How on earth do you do that?
Yeah, well, we're doing it. And there's different challenges for different things, right? So, for example, in previous organizations, we have grown both organically and through acquisition, and therefore globalized very quickly. And again, when you globalize quickly, when you acquire businesses, again, how do you bring them in? How do you make them feel? And in my experience, the biggest impact we've had is where we've, so for example, we made an acquisition in Germany in a previous organization, and they had their own branding. They had their own sort of, branded mugs and pens and stuff on the table, their own brand on the wall, their own values on the wall. And we said, okay, we are going to have a kickoff day. And kickoff day is going to be, let's say, 1st of November. And we did everything we possibly could with our marketing colleagues, with our, also finance colleagues, but also the HR colleagues, to remove everything that was to do with the old brand and replace it with everything that we could with our new brand. And then on the kickoff day, we had employees come in and just go, oh my God, wow, office completely rebranded. Nothing from the old brand exists there anymore. And then as soon as they come in, we talk about what it means to be a part of this brand, our values, our culture, and so on. And again, it's an amazing experience because you can see the reactions of people as they come in. Now, I'm not going to say everybody's like, oh my God, yes, we're not that anymore. We're now this. But there are people that will say, okay, these people, they mean business. This looks fun. This looks interesting. Let me at least give it a go. Because, that's human nature. Change is difficult, but, trying to help people with, something, seeing the excitement behind a change, in my experience, is something that's worked.
Yeah, and sometimes on those sorts of big change programs, sometimes those little things are the big things as well, right? The pot pens with the old brand on it, can really ruin the whole feeling of momentum and fresh start and all the rest of it. So I think that's interesting to think through. Absolutely, everything's a real challenge.
Well, the thing is, the psychology doesn't change if not. So, there's been situations where we've gone into offices and said, you're still using notepads with the old brand on it from like 3 years ago. And they're like, yeah, but they're good notepads. We do want to get rid of them. We're like, well, you can give them to charity. Because the thing is, whilst they're still seeing the old brand, psychologically, they're still thinking about being a part of that old company, and it's not that they're purposefully rejecting something, but psychologically they're still there and we haven't moved them over here.
Well, it's like I always struggle with people who bring in their old notepads, new hires who bring in the notepads from their previous organisation. Yes. It's just like, you want that clean, you want to have earned that clean break, really, and you want them to sort of come with you. It's so until we spend too much time talking about stationery, which I do think is important, but I love that you mentioned the challenge of global growth. And I think this is so fascinating when it comes to employer brand, I suppose brand more generally. Do you think the right approach is to create a global employer brand that works in every market? Is that possible, or do you have to have elements that are sort of truly localized?
I think you need to have one brand, one company, one brand. How that translates in different cultures, in different languages, might be slightly different. But I think if you start making it too bespoke, then you quickly run into trouble, I think, because then it changes things. So I would always say one brand, one set of global values. How you translate those values, again, might be slightly different. I remember, for example, we had in YouGov, one of our values that was, we are fearless. Now, in English, that means, we're brave, we think outside the box, we're going to be entrepreneurial, all those good things. But that word fearless meant something very different in some of the other languages, some of the other countries that we were in. So we had to translate it in a slightly different way for it to become right and relevant in those different languages. But we didn't change the word fearless. We kept that, but we translated it so that people understood what we meant by it. I absolutely one brand.
Fascinating. But I suppose it gets more local when you're looking at EVP. I would guess. I'd love to. Let's just make sure that listeners will be at sort of a range of different technical understanding. But how do you look at EVP as opposed to employer brand? Where does it?
Yeah, EVP is basically, what does it mean for someone to work in a particular organization? So when I think of EcoOnline's EVP, I would think, why would somebody come and work for us, and why do people stay with us? And we're very blessed in EcoOnline in the sense that we have a tech business, a SaaS business, but the products that we work with are and that we produce and so on, develop, are products to do with ESG, with sustainability, and with things that people really feel a sense of purpose to. And so we are a bit blessed in that employees, our EVP is based around those types of factors as well, that, we are here to protect people and the planet that we live in. Our products are, that is the mission of our organization. But but if you're working for a financial organization or manufacturing or whatever type of organization is, each organization, I suppose, needs to think about, what is it that is going to make this purposeful for our employees. I guess that's where EVP comes in. And I think you hinted, Felix, that it could be different in different cultures and so on. And I think, yes, it can, because not every country is at the same stage of, development. Not every country is at the same stage of, thinking in certain topics and so on. And therefore that can be flexed up and down. But the general sort of gist of it, I suppose, is something that is constant for everybody in the organization. So EVP is more, for me, it's more about purpose, sense of belonging, and I'm going to say culture as well, because I think all of those things sort of create an internal culture. But, that culture will feel different to people in the UK compared to people in China or people in the US or people in France or whatever, because there's cultural norms as well that feed into it, as in local cultural norms. So you've got the company culture and then you've got normal cultural norms.
Absolutely. I've always thought that a company culture is kind of in the eye of the beholder as well. I mean, I think I've heard from people about Instant Impact that we've always had a very consistent company culture, but my experience of that culture has been radically different as I go through different phases in my life and different focuses in my job. So I definitely think there's two sides to that. So I'm sure that changes even more country to country.
And if I could just interrupt, I mean, yes, and I think cultures evolve over time as well, right? So the culture of what we have today, so we're right at the beginning of that journey. We have just, like 2 weeks ago, we had our Global Leadership Summit. We had our top 100 leaders come together in London, and we really spent a lot of time talking about what is the culture of our organization. And we've had lots of workshops with our employees and so on, focus groups, and all of that fed into that. So it wasn't top down. It's like, this is what our people are telling us. This is what our culture looks like. How do we feel about that? What do we do with that? And so on. But that will evolve, as our organization evolves, that will evolve as well. And there's part of that culture that will emerge as stronger elements of it. And there's other parts that won't. And that's just normal as well.
That's really interesting. So you went through a process of, well, you said it right at the beginning, you had that inside out approach.
Yeah.
How has it been then for a company of 15 different acquisitions? How have you been surprised by any of the results of that, I suppose, culture audit? Makes it sound awful, but I don't know. culture research.
Culture research. Yeah, that's a nicer word.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, there are, as I said, the 15 acquisitions mean that there was cultures that existed already. Mm-hmm. So there were some things that were slightly different, but there was a lot of things. And this was the interesting thing about this, is there's a lot of things that were very similar. And the similar pieces were around protecting people. It was around making sure that everybody had a voice. It was around some of the product sort of values that we had. So there were some things that were different, but it was the things that were similar that we concentrated on. And we've worked very closely with our marketing colleagues through this as well. So because at the same time as us sort of identifying our internal culture, our marketing colleagues have been looking at our brand, and how that comes across in terms of, compared to our competitors? How does that come across in terms of what it is that we want to do as an organization? What does our website look like? What do our stories look like, and so on? So we've been working very closely so that although it's an inside out process, there is an outside process as well going on that we're making sure that we're joining up with, so that we're talking to each other. So we haven't got something different over here that we've created internally, and then something very different that doesn't relate externally.
Well, and I think that's one of the areas that we see. Well, I've seen companies go so wrong previously. Is you've got people function, maybe working with the CEO in one area over here, defining what's the employee life cycle, what are the moments that matter, what's the EVP, what's the employer brand, what's X, Y, and Z. And then you've got marketing and sales working over here on, well, what are we doing in the market? What sort of how do we differentiate to our competitors, and very little conversation between the two. I'm just wondering, what would you say is, how would you characterize the right working relationship between the functions looking at external brand to sell whatever it is a company's selling, and then the employee, the potential candidates, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think it's respecting the research that each is doing. So we sat in with the marketing team when they were talking about brand with agencies in terms of, what thinking there was. And they sat in with us when we were talking to our employees about our culture and our values and our behaviors. And therefore, they heard this and we heard that. And then my colleague Jim, who's our CMO, he and I sat down together and said, look, these are the things that we're hearing that are the strengths and the similarities, and these are the things that we're going to focus on together. I think the difficulty comes when that internal connection isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess experience gives you the foresight to make sure that you are communicating more. So, I haven't been, it hasn't been perfect all the way, right? I've had experiences where I've been going off doing this internal research and culture work and not necessarily talking to the marketing guys, and vice versa. So, you learn from your experiences. And I know now, actually, it's really fundamental, really important that you do talk to each other, because we're one company at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It feels also like you're at this super exciting point where you're taking feels like you're taking a pause, although maybe it doesn't feel like that to you, but you're sort of, okay, well, let's take stock, let's decide how we're setting going forwards. I wonder, when you are in that execution phase where you're like, okay, well, we know what we're doing, let's go. We've spoken about the relationship with marketing, and there are other voices that you think that as a custodian of the employer brand you need to check in with on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, the Rev team, they're out there, they're talking to our customers all the time. It's not just how we come across to the world. It's, our customers are really important. Our customers will be talking to our competitors, and they will have a view of how we compare to those competitors. So yeah, the revenue team is another team that we've been speaking to. So any external facing team, we speak to and have spoken to. Internally, I mean, naturally, it's not like I've gone and done research with the finance team, but I will speak to my peers in finance and in other in operations and CS and so on, to understand what they're hearing. We have an employee engagement survey that we run once a quarter. There's lots of really interesting comments and information that comes through that. So it's putting all of those together, really. It's not just HR and marketing, for sure.
And speaking of the future, you've got a big, aggressive or exciting growth journey ahead of you. What do you, I suppose, on what cadence do you think you need to refresh the EVP to make sure that you're taking stock of the business that you're becoming, which will be different from the business that it was however long ago?
I don't think anyone can say you've got to do it every 2 years or 5 years or whatever. I think it really depends on how your business is growing and evolving. In a previous organization, I remember we got to the stage where we had become quite global, and we decided actually it just feels like it's the right time for us to just review our values, review our employer brand, review our branding externally as well. There was a lot of sort of tech, I suppose, competitors that we wanted to I'm just going to say, we wanted to hire people from them.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to make ourselves look as attractive as other tech organizations at the time. What did we do? This sounds really weird, but this is actually what we did. We put in a twirly slide that went from the third floor down into the basement. And this is the early 2000s, right? We put in bean bags, fistball tables, free breakfast on Fridays, all of those types of things that were very on trend at the time, because we felt that if we didn't change and if we didn't refresh ourselves, then we wouldn't be as, as exciting, as sexy, as attractive as other competitors around us. And we wanted to make sure that we got the top talent. And to get the top talent, they wanted to have these benefits at the time. So that's what we put in. And, our CEO was the first person that went chest forward down that slide. I was having a health and safety heart attack at the time, but he was okay. But it was fun and we enjoyed it. And as a result, we did, when we brought people in for interview, this is pre-COVID, obviously, we brought people in for interview face to face, and we used to take them and say, do you want to go down to the basement by the slide or the lift? And it just, used to create a bit of a conversation and excitement. And so that's when we felt it was right for us to do the refresh at that time. And I suppose there's similar signs like that companies will feel.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think that there are so many tools at our disposal today. I mean, I'm going to say to keep your finger on the pulse of what people actually feel about the organization. Everything from exit interviews to a pulse survey. And I think those are the sort of things that I've found really useful as a leader of my business. Oh, okay, well, this doesn't feel quite right anymore. And I've got so much respect for team members who put up their hands and say, you know what, this thing that you love, it's not doing it for the rest of us.
And sometimes they are one voice that say it for many, right?
Yeah.
But we need those one voices. And surveys are great. But what I would also say is follow those surveys up with focus groups as well, with your employees, because sometimes things that might be said in a survey might come across in the wrong way, or maybe there's something else to it. So, we try and make sure that we follow up those with conversations as well, so that we can get the real sort of essence of what it is that people are trying to say.
And obviously, since you started in people leadership roles, you said 20 years ago, I would imagine the channels that you're focusing on to get your employer brand and EVP across have changed pretty dramatically. How are you expecting that to continue changing? And what are the key channels that you think are going to be more and more important over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question. So the World Wide Web didn't really, I mean, it existed. I'm not that old. It did exist, but it just wasn't used as like it is today, right? LinkedIn wasn't there. There's loads of other things. I mean, Instagram, Facebook, etc. These social media outlets, they didn't exist. And therefore, even if I put my wildest imagination into play in those early 2000s, there's no way that could have imagined what we've got today. So I think, it's a case of just understanding that things will evolve and new things will come up. And you've got to just make sure that, I think you said, keep your finger on the pulse. Either we as people leaders or people in our team, we've got to make sure that we understand what are the levers that are being pulled at the moment, where are employees looking. There might be a trend today for people to go over here, but there might be a trend tomorrow for something else that's coming out that we need to just make sure that we're also on top of as well. I love asking graduates that sort of question because they are on it. They will tell me, oh yeah, we look over here, or we look over there, or we, make sure we check this site out or look into this. And that's where I get a lot of my sort of like insight from. And I think, that's where the next generation's looking. And that gives you an insight into maybe what's coming up ahead. So I think it's very difficult to know how things will evolve. I think it's just knowing that things will evolve. And where we go and tell our stories or find our candidates or shout about our employer brand isn't going to be the same as it is today in, another sort of 5 years' time or so.
Absolutely. And that feels like a great spot to end our chat today. Saqi, thank you so much for coming on. It was really fascinating.
Thank you very much for having me. Enjoyed it.